So this happened about a year ago. My church runs a college group on part of a land that's mostly wooded, with a small clearing and a pavilion set up in the middle. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, I show up one night and there's this new kid. We'll call him Joe. I notice right away there's something creepy about him. We are playing a card game sitting around a table, and he keeps saying weird stuff like, "You guys should hang an upside down cross and an upside down American flag." A mosquito bites someone and they kill it, leaving blood on their leg. He becomes infatuated with blood. He calls people over to the bonfire to look at it. "Look, guys, blood." He keeps saying over and over, weird. Later, we are singing a worship song and he wanders from his chair to stand on the stage, just watching us. I have anxiety, so at this point, I'm still in full-blown panic mode, thinking at any moment he's gonna start shooting or something. I frantically look around, and someone jumps to take him off the stage. They talk for a moment, and he returns to his seat. He comes to my church again on Sunday morning and finds me in the crowd. Starts small talking, asking me where I go to school, where I work, what's my major, etc. I lie my ass off. He shows me some pictures of his family and his phone, and I see pictures of a swastika and an upside-down American flag while he scrolls. He sits next to me through the service, and I literally run to my car as soon as it's over. I get in, close the door, and he's standing at my window. I crack it open. "Sorry, I have to run. I have a family thing." I finally decide to call the police and give them all of the information. They do a wellness check, tell me he's supposed to be taking medication and going to therapy, but he's not right now. They advise me to block him, and I do. If I ever see him again, they tell me to call 911 immediately. So crazy blood-obsessed Nazi murderer, let's not meet. A couple of years ago, I used to attend a boarding school in Singapore. This was for the last 2 years of high school. I'm a Catholic, and since none of my friends in the boarding school were practicing Catholics, I attended Sunday Mass on my own every weekend. If you have been to Singapore, you know it's one of the best countries to go around on your own. It's sometimes even more fun than going around with other people. So this wasn't something that bothered me too much. This Sunday in question came before a long week of submissions and tests, so I was already stressed to begin with. On top of that, I had also somehow managed to oversleep, so I had to splurge on a cab instead of taking the bus like I usually do. I only got a limited amount of money for the month, and I spent most of it on food. So by the time I walked into church, I was upset and just looking for some peace. I guess the stress made me look frazzled and upset, which might have been what caught his attention. As I was late for the Mass, I had to stand at the back of the church with the other latecomers. As there were no seats left open for us, this man was standing a few feet to my right. He was wearing spectacles and an eternal frown. He was Chinese, like almost everyone else in the church. I noticed him scowling at me through the Mass, but ignored him on purpose because I didn't want to get pissed unnecessarily. I was the only Indian in my boarding school, so I was used to receiving weird comments from peers and occasionally teachers. It didn't help that the area in which my school and also this church were located was a pretty rich neighborhood, and I had never seen an obviously non-Christian person in the church. So the too long did not read is I was used to being a started at minority. I refused to pay this guy any attention. What happened next took place during a lull in the Mass. During the distribution of a communion, many people tend to move out of the church after receiving communion, so a seat opened up near where I and the man were standing. I moved towards it, and after making sure there were no elderly around me, the man maneuvered himself so that he was not standing behind me. This was when I began feeling unsafe. Then he began talking. His words were not detected towards anyone in particular. He seemed to be there on his own. The silence in the church only served to amplify what he was saying. He said a bunch of things that I don't remember now. He also repeated a lot of the stuff, which is why it got stuck in my head. He must have said prostituting at least 5 times, and maybe even switched it out for whoring once or twice. It was obvious his words were meant for me. I turned around to look at him, and he first began with a kind of "Are you fucking kidding me?" expression on my face. He was staring at me, his face the stock image for hatred and rage. The people around him were shifting uncomfortably. I turned around, shut my eyes, and willed him quiet. He didn't shut up. At some point, I began quietly crying. I wanted so badly to move away, to run out of the church, but I was scared of causing a scene and making people notice me in a way I did not want to be noticed. I cannot fully explain the absurdity of this situation. We were in a church, in some other section. The priest was still distributing the communion to the congregation. The rest of the church sat in prayerful silence. And in the back, in this one corner, this random guy was spewing hateful, racist comments directed at a 17-year-old, and nobody said a word to shut him up. When the priest returned to the altar and he had us raise for the final blessing, I took the opportunity to get out of my pew and move away from the man. To my horror, he followed. The mass had ended by then, and people were moving towards the exit, as was I. He followed behind me, raised his voice, asked me where I was going, called me a prostitute several times. That was when a lady in the vicinity said something like, "Don't say that, don't use those words." But when I looked to her thinking she would help me get out of the way from this guy, she refused to meet my eye and moved away. We got out of the church. I couldn't see the guy anymore, so I ran blindly towards the exit and in the direction of the bus stop. I couldn't think straight, didn't know what I looked like, had no clue what was happening. I got to the bus stop and decided to get onto the first bus that pulled up. Even if it was going the wrong route, I thought I was safe, and got my phone out of my purse. Then I turned around, and like a horror movie, he was there, walking towards me. The only people at the bus stop was a woman and a kid. I did not feel confident enough to approach them and ask for help, so, fingers shaking, I unlocked my phone and called my roommate. She answered the phone googly. I had probably woken her up, and without waiting for her to say anything, I told her, very loudly, that a strange man had followed me from the church to the bus stop, and he had been verbally abusing me, and I did not feel safe. The man who had been advancing towards me all this time went and stood with the woman and the child, who had also heard me and moved away from him. A bus pulled up, I got in, the doors closed, and we pulled away. In that moment, I was so overwhelmed by what had happened that I stood at the entrance of the bus, next to the bus driver, and just burst out crying. I don't remember what was going through my head. My heart was going crazy in my chest. I must have been having the worst panic attack. The bus driver and everyone else in the bus was staring at me like I was crazy. Probably. At the next stop, the driver asked me if I was okay, and when I couldn't respond, asked me where I needed to go. I gave him the name of my school. A passenger who had gotten into the bus took me back out, explained to me which bus I need to take, and someone asked, also waiting at the bus stop, to make sure I caught the right bus. Somehow I got back to the boarding school. I had left my roommate on call, and it made her extremely worried. By the time I got back to my room, she had notified our mentor and had placed a call to the church to ask if I was still there and if they could find me. They obviously did not know anything. So I guess that's my let's not meet story. I just want to clarify that besides this one experience, I had never felt unsafe in Singapore. I used to go to church. Well, I still do, just rarely now. That I've seen more opinions and all of that. Some background. I do have cerebral palsy that limits my motor functions a bit and messes up my leg muscles. I've been through 2 surgeries, so I know how odd it feels to be pitied. I can walk just fine with and without AFOs. Anyway, I went to a church with my dad, my stepmom, and my sister, and my older stepsister. I'll call it the Church of the Corn because I don't want to bring up the rest of the church down for this isolated incident by calling it by its real moniker. To say that they were enthusiastic about worship was kind of an understatement. One night, when it was just me and my sister, we just hung out with our church friends. Some of them still are a part of the new youth group. That's much more bearable and less getting traumatized by seeing the scene in the Passion of the Christ. Sitting in front row with my friends, being reserved and quiet because I did not like to talk much in service, even though I used the time to think about how BS this all was. Now I was zoning out, as he was talking about the usual stuff you hear in an evangelical church, when all of a sudden I feel his hand on my knee. I want this boy to run, to jump, to walk. It took my mind for a second to register what was going on. I'm usually a physical person. I love hugs and being hugged. I love handshakes and other physical displays of affection, but I didn't really trust this guy. I froze as he continued, and I felt like he was using me for furthering his agenda. I ran around the sanctuary, soon forgetting the uncomfortable feeling that squatted in my gut. I still felt uncomfortable about him later on, clinging to my sister or my dad. He left for another church, but by then I was out of there. Sir, I don't mean to demean you or bring you down if you just so happen upon this, but I don't like the feeling like it means to an end. Let's not meet again, okay?